I didn't know a quiet morning by the lake would turn into the moment my life collapsed and then rebuilt itself in a way the entire neighborhood never saw coming. All I wanted on that day was peace, a calm shoreline, a line in the water, a breath that didn't feel heavy. But the lake, the one I thought belonged to everyone, the one that felt like the only calm space left in my life, apparently belonged to someone else. Or so the homeowners association claimed. I remember the first sound that pulled me out of that calm, the sharp crack of a camera shutter. Not a greeting, not a warning, just the cold, mechanical sound of someone gathering evidence against me, as if I were doing something dangerous or criminal. I turned around, and that was the first moment I saw the HOA president standing there with a clipboard. The same clipboard she'd later claim was just procedure, even though on that morning it looked like a weapon. She didn't shout. She didn't speak with concern. She just stared through me the way someone studies a stain they want removed. In that instant, I sensed something I couldn't fully explain. A strange mixture of authority and pettiness, the kind of power that feels too small to matter but somehow manages to ruin everything it touches. Before I could say a word, she was already writing something down. My name, the date, the time, and then she made the kind of accusation that sticks to you even when you know you're innocent. She said I was breaking the rules. She said I was trespassing. She said the lake wasn't mine to use. It didn't matter that I lived steps away. It didn't matter that I'd watched families fish on that same shoreline for years. It didn't matter that the so-called rule she claimed existed wasn't actually written anywhere. The moment she saw me with that fishing rod, she decided I was the problem. And in that quiet morning light, with the sun barely rising, I felt something growing, something heavy and unfair, something that whispered this would not be the last time she tried to control me. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't about fishing at all. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about the lake. It was about power, small power, fragile power, the kind of power people cling to when they feel their lives slipping out of their hands. And I had unknowingly walked right into the center of hers. The fine arrived the next day. A bold number printed across a letter that read like an accusation, a threat, and a lecture all at once. I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach as I read it. Not because of the money, though the number was ridiculous, but because of what it implied. Someone I had never spoken to, someone who didn't know me, someone who had never even bothered to say hello, had decided she had authority over me, over my peace, over the water I'd grown up around. That day, something cracked inside me. Not anger, not fear, something quieter. A realization that these weren't just rules, they were chains, and I wasn't the only one being pulled by them. The stories started surfacing. Neighbors whispering about warnings they had received, or letters taped to their doors, or threats about yard decorations, paint colors, even the height of their grass. Every person had a story, and every story ended the same way, with the HOA president deciding she knew best. But nothing compared to what came next. Nothing prepared me for the moment she escalated everything by calling the police on me for simply standing in the spot I had stood in since childhood. The moment those flashing lights reflected off the lake, everything changed. My peace, my privacy, my trust in the community I lived in, all shattered in one surreal moment.
And that's when I realized something important. I wasn't just in a petty conflict. I was in a battle I never signed up for. One that would only get worse if I stayed quiet. One that could destroy the place I once loved. That night, lying awake in a house that suddenly felt smaller, I thought about the lake, the way it shimmered at sunrise, the way the wind carried across it like a whisper, the way it felt like home in a way no building ever could. And then I thought about the HOA president, about the way she looked at me that morning, as if the lake belonged to her and her alone. That's when a thought crept into my mind. A wild thought. A thought that didn't feel real at first. But the more I sat with it, the stronger it grew. What if I didn't just fight back? What if I changed everything? I didn't know then just how far the fight would go. I didn't know how many secrets the HOA was hiding or how many lines they were willing to cross. I didn't know that my simple act of fishing would reveal a mess of corruption, manipulation, and desperate control. And I certainly didn't know that one decision, a decision no one expected, would flip the entire neighborhood upside down. Because what started as a peaceful morning by the lake would end with me standing somewhere I never imagined, holding the one thing the HOA never thought I could possibly own. Something that would shift the balance of power forever and force every single person in that neighborhood to face the consequences of their actions. They wanted control. They wanted authority. They wanted to make an example out of me. But they had no idea what they were triggering. So ask yourself this. What happens when the very person the HOA tries so hard to silence becomes the one holding all the power? Keep watching, because the moment they punished me for fishing was the moment everything in this neighborhood changed. Before everything spiraled into confrontation and chaos, my life in that lakeside neighborhood was ordinary. Not perfect, not exceptional, just comfortably ordinary. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe ordinary has a way of making you forget how quickly things can change. How even the quietest place can hide the kind of tension that waits patiently for the right moment to explode. When I first moved into the community, the biggest thing on my mind wasn't drama, rules, or power struggles. It was starting over. I had spent years in crowded cities, wrapped up in noise and deadlines, and the constant race of people trying to outrun their own stress. I wanted something slower, something cleaner, something that felt like breathing deeply for the first time in years.
The lake was the reason I chose this neighborhood. Not the houses, not the manicured lawns, not the gated entrance. The lake. It sat in the middle of the community like a mirror, wide enough to reflect the sky and calm enough to steady even the most restless mind. The water didn't rush or roar, it simply existed, quietly holding its place, turning sunrise into a soft glow and sunset into warm gold. To anyone else, it might have just been a community feature, something listed in a brochure between walking trails and pet-friendly. But to me, it was a promise of peace, a promise of escape, a promise of home. I settled quickly into a routine that became almost sacred. Early mornings were always the best, before the rest of the neighborhood stirred, before cars started their engines and lawnmowers sliced through the quiet. I would walk to the lake. Sometimes I sat on the dock with my coffee. Sometimes I stood by the shoreline, letting the cool air brush against my face. And sometimes, the moments I treasured most, I took my fishing rod and let the world disappear while I waited for a tug on the line. It wasn't about catching anything. It wasn't even about fishing. It was about stillness, about feeling connected to something uncomplicated. The lake didn't ask questions. It didn't judge. It didn't demand. It just let me exist. The neighbors I met in those first few months were polite, if a little distant. Most smiled with that polite, practiced friendliness that people in planned communities often perfect. They waved from their driveways, complimented my dog, or casually mentioned the HOA guidelines in the same sentence as their grocery lists, as if both carried the same weight. At the time, I thought nothing of it, Rules were rules. I had lived in enough places to know they existed everywhere, in one form or another. What I didn't realize, though, was that in this neighborhood, rules weren't just guidelines. They were currency. They were leverage. They were tools people used to feel bigger, louder, more important than they really were. And the queen of those rules, though no one used that word out loud, was the HOA president. I didn't know much about her then. I had seen her once or twice, walking briskly through the neighborhood like a supervisor on patrol. She always carried a clipboard, which I assumed was part of her role. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed everything around her existed because she allowed it. Her gaze swept across houses, lawns, driveways, and fences like she was scanning for flaws only she could fix. Neighbors spoke about her in the kind of tone people use when they're trying to sound neutral, but can't quite hide their frustration. "She's very involved," some said. "She likes things orderly," others added. "She just wants everything to look nice," they'd insist, even though their voices tightened on the last word. At the time, I brushed it off. There are people like that everywhere. People who cling to titles, to roles, to anything that makes them feel significant. As long as she stayed out of my way and I stayed out of hers, everything would be fine. And for a while it was. Life settled into a rhythm. Work, home, quiet evenings, weekends by the water. I fixed up my backyard, planted a small garden, painted my porch railing, and even made a couple of friends on my side of the neighborhood. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just life, steady and simple. But looking back, I can see the signs, small signs. Signs that hinted at the storm that would eventually tear through everything I thought was stable. There was the neighbor who got a warning for having a bird feeder too close to the property line. The woman across the street who received a notice about her trash cans being visible for more than 3 minutes after pickup. The older couple who were fined for placing solar lights along their walkway, even though they'd been there for years before the current HOA board took over. At the time, these stories felt like harmless neighborhood gossip, mild annoyances, things people vented about in frustration but accepted, because fighting the HOA felt pointless, something everyone disliked but tolerated because they didn't think they had any real power to change it. I should have paid more attention. Because all those little moments were warnings. Warnings that the HOA, or at least the person in charge of it, wasn't just protecting property values, as they like to claim. They were controlling everything they could. Every blade of grass, every brick, every inch of shoreline. Especially the shoreline. I learned slowly, through conversations, complaints, and offhand comments, that the lake wasn't just a community feature. It was the HOA president's pride. Her responsibility, as she described it. She talked about it like a personal asset, something she alone had to manage, protect, and oversee. She insisted that the lake was governed by strict rules that, strangely, no one had ever actually seen written anywhere. Rules about access, rules about fishing, rules about when you could walk along the edge and when you couldn't. No one questioned it. Not really. People were so used to being warned, fined, or corrected over small things that the idea of challenging her authority felt dangerous. Still, none of this had reached me directly. Not yet. Then came the moment that shifted everything, though at the time it felt insignificant. I was walking back from the lake one morning, fishing rod in hand, when I noticed her standing across the street, watching. Not casually observing the neighborhood, watching me. Her expression wasn't friendly or curious. It was calculating, like she was filing something away in her mind, something important, something she could use. She didn't speak. I didn't speak. The moment lasted only a few seconds before she turned away and continued down the sidewalk. But the feeling stayed with me for hours afterward, a faint, uneasy sense that something had shifted. It wasn't fear. Not yet. Just awareness. Awareness that I had been seen, evaluated, marked in some small way I didn't understand. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. Looking back, it almost feels like the calm before a storm, the kind of calm that makes the air heavy and the sky strangely still. I kept to my routine, unaware that something was already in motion behind the scenes, something I wouldn't learn about until it was too late to stop. Because while I enjoyed the serenity of the lake, the HOA president was preparing something else entirely. The first step in a conflict that would drag the entire neighborhood into chaos. It would start with a warning, then a fine, then a confrontation, then something bigger, something so absurd, so extreme, so completely out of proportion that it would change everything. But before any of that happened, before the rules twisted into weapons and the lake became a battleground, I was just a resident looking for peace. And she was just a neighbor with a clipboard. Two lives moving quietly through the same community. Two paths that hadn't collided yet. But they would. And when they finally did, the shockwaves would ripple across the entire neighborhood, from the shoreline to the board meetings to the front doors of people who never imagined picking sides in a war they didn't ask for. Because as I would soon learn, in this neighborhood, peace wasn't something you found. It was something someone allowed you to have. And once she decided I didn't deserve it anymore, everything I thought was calm would begin to twist into conflict. The lake that had brought me here, the place that felt like home, was about to become the center of a fight I never expected, and one I couldn't walk away from.
If the warning on my door was the first tremor, the fine that followed was the quake that shook everything loose. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a clerical error. Maybe the HOA president confused my address with someone else's. But when I read the letter a second time, slowly, the reality sank in. This wasn't accidental. This was targeted. The violation notice stated, in bold font, that I had misused community resources by engaging in unauthorized fishing activities resulting in disruption to wildlife, property, and community order. It felt like a joke. I had been standing alone, in silence, doing nothing except breathing and waiting for a peaceful tug on the line. There had been no disruption, no damage, no rule posted anywhere. But the HOA didn't need truth. It only needed authority. The fine attached to the letter wasn't small. It was the kind of amount designed to scare you into obedience. The kind of fee that made you question whether fighting back was worth the time, the energy, the stress. The kind of financial slap intended to put you in your place. I sat with that letter for hours, reading it over and over until the words no longer looked like words at all, just sharp shapes meant to cut away any sense of belonging I had left. It wasn't the money that bothered me, it was the message behind it. We are watching you. We expect compliance. Don't test us again. But the more I read, the more anger began stirring under my skin. Quiet at first, then a slow burn. I wasn't disrupting anything. I wasn't breaking anything. I wasn't harming the lake or the community. All I wanted was peace. Yet somehow, that simple desire had become a threat. Still, I tried to resolve things the calm way. I sent a polite email requesting clarity. I asked where the rule was documented. I asked when it had been approved. I asked why it applied to me now when countless residents had been fishing there for years. Hours passed, then a day, then two. No reply. What I didn't know, what I would only learn much, much later, was that the HOA president had already been stirring the waters long before I received that letter. She had been speaking to board members, planting seeds, framing me as a troublemaker, a problem, a resident who needed to be handled properly. And she wasn't doing it publicly. She was doing it behind closed doors. Secret meetings, off-the-record discussions, quiet whispers that never made their way into official minutes, the kind that let people twist narratives without ever being held accountable. By the end of that second day, I had a strange, uneasy sense that something was moving beneath the surface, something I wasn't fully seeing yet. Then came the knock. A sharp, impatient knock, the kind that demands attention rather than requesting it. When I opened the door, the HOA president stood there with the same clipboard I had seen weeks ago by the lake. She didn't smile, she didn't greet me, she simply lifted her chin, as if waiting for me to step aside and let her in. I didn't move. Her gaze drifted slowly over my shoulder, scanning my living room, as if searching for evidence of wrongdoing. When she finally met my eyes, hers were sharp and cold, the kind of stare that makes you feel smaller, even when you know you haven't done anything wrong. "I trust you received the notice," she said. Her tone wasn't a question, it was a statement of dominance. I nodded. "Good," she continued. "I expect the fine to be paid by the end of the week. We have rules for a reason, and residents who cannot follow them create issues for everyone." She paused, long enough for the silence to feel heavy. "Fishing is expressly prohibited without HOA authorization." "Where is that rule written?" I asked. She didn't blink. "It's understood." "By who?"
By the community. I almost laughed. Understood by her, maybe. But she wasn't the community. When I didn't respond the way she clearly expected, her jaw tightened. "If you continue to violate HOA guidelines, additional penalties may apply." Penalties. Not consequences. Penalties. The word hung in the air like a threat. She turned to leave, but halfway down the walkway, she said, almost casually, "And I'd suggest not returning to the lake for now. It's important we maintain order." Maintaining order. Maintaining control. Same thing to her. I watched her walk away, each step deliberate, purposeful, almost triumphant, as if issuing that warning was something she enjoyed. It was then I realized something unsettling. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was enforcing her rules, and she wanted everyone to know it. For the next week, the air in the neighborhood shifted. People watched me differently. Conversations hushed when I walked past. A neighbor I had spoken to for months suddenly avoided eye contact. Another, usually friendly, stepped into her house the moment I stepped outside. It was subtle, but real. Like invisible lines were being drawn, sides being chosen in a conflict that hadn't even fully formed yet. Then, the second notice arrived. This one accused me of public disturbance for lingering around community property with equipment that could cause harm. The equipment in question, my fishing rod. A harmless rod, suddenly recast as a threat. The fine attached was even larger. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And when things don't make sense, you start looking for answers. I began asking neighbors quietly. Had anyone reported concerns? Had anyone complained about noise? Had anyone filed a safety report? Every single person said no. But they said it with fear in their voice, glancing over their shoulders as if the HOA president might appear behind them at any second. That alone told me everything I needed to know. People weren't silent because they didn't care. They were silent because they were scared. But scared of what? The answer came sooner than I expected. One evening as I was taking out the trash, I overheard two board numbers talking near the sidewalk. They didn't see me. They weren't whispering. They were discussing something openly. Something they assumed no one else was around to hear. They were talking about a meeting. A meeting I had never been told about. A meeting that wasn't listed in any newsletter or community calendar. A meeting happening that night in one of their garages. A secret HOA meeting. They were planning something. Something involving me.
My chest tightened, not with fear, but with anger. The kind of anger that mixes with disbelief and confusion and a growing sense of unfairness. Why was I being targeted? What did they think I had done? What narrative had the HOA president twisted so thoroughly that it required a private gathering to address? As quietly as possible, I followed the distant sound of voices toward the garage they mentioned. I stayed far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to feel the cold sting of their words. She says he's being difficult. He's questioning the rules. If we don't act now, other residents will challenge her authority. She wants him written up. She wants a proposal ready for the next official meeting. It didn't sound like a discussion. It sounded like strategy. And in the center of that strategy was me. The worst part? None of the board members disagreed. None pushed back. None asked for proof of any violations. They simply nodded along, afraid of rocking the boat, or more accurately, afraid of upsetting the person steering it. The more I listened, the more a pattern emerged. This wasn't about fishing. It wasn't about disturbing wildlife. It wasn't even about rules. It was about control. The HOA president controlled the board, and through the board, she controlled the neighborhood. To her, I wasn't a resident. I was a challenge, a threat to the quiet obedience she had constructed around herself like a throne. That realization hit hard. When the meeting finally ended and the participants parted ways, I slipped back into my house, heart pounding. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't misunderstanding the situation. I was being targeted, intentionally, strategically, methodically. And the next day proved it. A third notice appeared on my door. No explanation, no description of the violation, just an invoice, just another fine. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was harassment in the purest, clearest form. I decided I wasn't going to be scared anymore. That afternoon, I went to the lake, not to fish, not yet, but to stand there, to reclaim the space with my presence, even if only for a moment. The sun was low, painting the water in shades of soft orange. The breeze was gentle, the lake was quiet. And then she appeared, the HOA president, as if summoned, as if she had been waiting for me to make this move. She walked toward me with a look that wasn't anger, but satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who believed they had already won. "You're aware of the notices," she said sharply. "I expect payment." I didn't respond. Her eyes narrowed. "Returning to this area is a direct violation of the warnings we issued."
"There is no rule against being here," I said quietly. "There is now." Her voice had a finality that sent a cold rush of disbelief through me. They weren't enforcing rules, they were creating them. They were building them around me, slowly tightening like a trap. Every step I took, every attempt to breathe freely, they twisted into a violation. And she wasn't afraid to say it either. She wanted me to feel cornered. She wanted me to submit. I turned to leave, not because I was afraid, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of reacting. But as I walked away from the water, I heard her say something under her breath, so quietly that it wasn't meant for me. "He'll learn. They always learn." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. It was the realization that this wasn't going to stop. It wasn't going to calm down. It wasn't going to fade away if I ignored it. This was escalating, intentionally, aggressively, and with a plan behind every step. And if I didn't do something soon, they would drown me in fines, harassment, and fabricated violations until I either complied or left. But I wasn't leaving. Not the house I worked for, not the neighborhood I chose, not the lake that kept me grounded. No, if she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But she had no idea what I was capable of. No idea how far I was willing to go. No idea what line she was pushing me toward. Because the truth is, I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to flip the entire game. And she wasn't prepared for the moment everything she thought she controlled slipped right through her fingers. But that part of the story comes later. For now, all that mattered was this. The HOA had declared war, and I was done playing defense. The morning everything finally snapped didn't start with chaos. It started with silence, the kind so heavy it feels like the world is holding its breath.
I woke to the uneasy sense that something was wrong even before I saw the paper taped to my front door. The house felt tense. The air felt sharp. Even the light outside seemed dimmer, as if the day itself was preparing for a confrontation. I hadn't stepped outside yet, but I could already hear voices, low, urgent, and far too close to my property line. I walked toward the door slowly, not sure what waited on the other side. When I opened it, I froze. The HOA president stood in my driveway, clipboard in hand, surrounded by 3 board members. Behind them were 2 police officers leaning against their cruiser, arms crossed, watching everything with a detached disinterest. It felt surreal, like stepping into a scene I hadn't agreed to be a part of. The HOA president didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge the absurdity of arriving with a small entourage. She simply raised her chin and said, "We need to talk." Her voice carried a satisfaction, a certainty, like she had already decided what the ending of my story would be, like she wasn't here to negotiate, she was here to finish something. I stepped outside, calm on the surface, even though something inside me tightened. "What is this?" She held up a large envelope with my name on it, sealed with the HOA's emblem as if it were a government document rather than a neighborhood weapon. "This is a formal notice of escalation," she said. I didn't take it. "Escalation for what?" She replied loudly enough to ensure the neighbors gathering at their windows could hear every word. "For repeated violations, non-compliance, disrespect for authority, and unauthorized use of community property." The words felt rehearsed, performed. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to make a show of power. One of the officers stepped forward slightly, hands resting on his belt. "Sir, we're just here to make sure everything stays peaceful." Peaceful. As if I was the threat. As if holding a fishing rod at a lake had somehow made me dangerous. The HOA president pressed the envelope into my chest. This time I took it. Not because I wanted to, but because refusing would give her something else to twist into a violation. When I opened it, I nearly laughed. The HOA wasn't just fining me anymore, they were demanding a mandatory compliance hearing for behaviors detrimental to community harmony. Mandatory. Behaviors. Harmony. They were rewriting reality and expecting me to accept it. I looked up at her. "You called the police for this?" She smiled, actually smiled. I felt it was necessary. There it was, the real motive. This wasn't about fishing. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about harmony. It was about punishing me for not bowing to her authority. Behind her, the board members hovered nervously, avoiding eye contact with me. They weren't leaders. They were shadows, following, agreeing, shrinking into whatever shape she needed them to be. But the neighbors watching from their porches, their expressions told a different story. Unease, confusion, embarrassment. Some knew what was happening wasn't right. Others had been through similar battles, and a few were too afraid to step into the line of fire.
The HOA president stepped closer. "If you don't attend the hearing, the board will have no choice but to pursue more serious action." "Such as?" I asked, though I already knew. "Liens," she said without hesitation. "Property restrictions. Legal intervention." The threat was clear. Obey or lose everything. The officer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even he seemed to realize this was overkill. I let the silence stretch between us. Let her believe, for one slow, simmering moment, that she had trapped me. That she had cornered me so tightly that the only path left was surrender. But she didn't know something important. I was done playing her game. I stepped past her without another word, walked to my car and got inside. The HOA president shouted after me, demanding I return and address the matter, but I didn't look back. I wasn't going to waste another breath explaining myself to someone who had already decided what I was in her eyes. I didn't go to work. I didn't go back inside. I drove straight out of the subdivision, past the gates, past the manicured lawns, past the lake I once thought belonged to everyone. I drove to the county office, because while she was busy plotting in secret meetings, twisting stories, and building a campaign to push me out, I had been doing something else. Research. Hours of it. Days of it. Digging through county records. Reading old property surveys. Tracing ownership lines. Finding loopholes she never expected anyone to look for. She thought she knew everything about the community she controlled. But she didn't know the most important detail of all. The HOA didn't own the lake. The HOA didn't manage the lake. The HOA didn't have authority over the lake. The lake, the one she used as a weapon, was actually coded as unclaimed private land due to an old filing oversight from decades earlier, long before the neighborhood even existed. It wasn't listed as HOA property. It wasn't in the community trust. It wasn't governed by any covenant she controlled. And unclaimed private land in the county could be purchased. The moment I confirmed the listing price, everything clicked. All the frustration, the anger, the humiliation, the endless harassment, every ounce of it crystallized into one single, precise decision. A decision she would never see coming. When I walked out of that office, the paperwork in my hand felt unreal, too light for something so powerful, too ordinary for something that could flip the entire neighborhood upside down. I drove back home with one thought repeating in my mind. She thinks the lake belongs to her. She thinks she controls it, controls access, controls rules, controls people. But in just a few days, she wouldn't control anything. The mandatory compliance hearing took place that weekend in the community hall, a sterile room with metal chairs lined in rows and a long folding table for the board. I didn't speak to anyone when I arrived. I didn't need to. Word had spread that the hearing was happening, and almost half the neighborhood showed up just to watch. The HOA president sat at the center of the table like a judge, smug and certain she was about to teach me a lesson. She tapped her pen on her clipboard, ready to document my defiance. The board members flanked her, stiff and silent.
She opened the meeting with a voice full of false professionalism. "We are here today to address the ongoing behavioral issues caused by one of our residents." I stood. She paused, annoyed. "You'll have your turn to—" "No," I said. "I'll speak now." There was something in my tone that made the room quiet instantly. For the first time since this began, she looked uncertain. I reached into my folder and pulled out the stack of documents, stamped, signed, and notarized. "I want to address the accusation that I've been misusing community property," I said calmly, "specifically, the lake." A murmur spread through the room. The HOA president straightened. "Yes, as I've made clear, as you've claimed, based on rules that don't exist and property you don't control." Her jaw tightened. "We absolutely control that lake. It falls under HOA jurisdiction." I held up the top document, the official county record. "No," I said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "it doesn't." The room fell silent. I walked toward the board's table, placed the document down in front of her, and continued, "This is the legal ownership history of the lake. And this," I placed the next document down, "is the deed issued to its new owner." Her face went pale. The board members leaned forward, eyes widening as they read. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. I let the silence grow for a moment, then said the words that hit the room like thunder. "I am the new owner." Everything stopped. The HOA president's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room erupted. Some gasped. Some laughed in disbelief. Others whispered to their spouses like they were witnessing something historic. "This is impossible," she snapped finally, voice shaking. "The HOA owns that lake. We always have." "No," I replied. "You only acted like you did. You claimed authority you never had. And you penalized me for using property you don't control."
I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she and the board could hear the next part, though everyone in the front row still heard it clear as day. And you called the police on me for being on my own property. The full horror of that truth washed over her face slowly. Disbelief, realization, embarrassment, panic. She tore through the documents with shaking hands, looking for any loophole, any technicality that could save her. There wasn't one. Her entire empire had just collapsed in front of the people she thought she commanded. I turned back to the room, speaking loudly enough for every resident to hear. Effective immediately, access to the lake is restricted. No entry for anyone without permission from its legal owner. Gasps filled the room. The HOA president slammed her hand on the table. "You can't do that." "I can, and I just did." She shot to her feet, pointing at me with trembling fury. "You're destroying the community." "No," I replied. "I'm stopping you from destroying it." Her voice cracked. "This is personal." I nodded. "Because you made it personal." For the first time since the day she confronted me at the shoreline, I saw something new in her expression. Fear. Not of me, not of the loss of control, but of the truth that everyone in that room now saw clearly.
She never had the power she pretended to have. The board members turned away from her. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. Phones came out. People were recording. This moment, her downfall, was happening in public, exactly where she had tried to shame me just hours earlier. I picked up my documents, held my head high, and walked toward the exit. As I reached the doorway, I turned back one final time. "You wanted to teach me a lesson," I said quietly, "but you taught me something else instead. That power isn't about rules. It's about who those rules actually belong to." Her face was red, her breathing sharp and uneven, her clipboard trembling in her grip. "And now," I finished, "the lake belongs to me." Then I walked out. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click, but the shockwave it sent through the neighborhood was anything but quiet. This was the turning point, the moment everything changed. The moment the hunter became the hunted. The moment the HOA president realized her reign was over. The moment the strongest weapon she had ever wielded was no longer hers. And the moment the entire neighborhood learned the truth. You don't win a power struggle by following their rules. You win by changing the game completely. When I stepped out of the community center, the air felt different. It wasn't lighter exactly, more like the pressure that had been building for months had finally cracked open. But inside that crack was something new, something shifting, something the HOA president could no longer control. I didn't go straight home. I walked down the street slowly, my footsteps unhurried for the first time in a long time. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Some hurried across lawns to avoid awkward eye contact. Others, surprisingly many, looked at me with something like respect, maybe even hope. But all of them knew something had changed. The lake, the place where all of this began, gleamed in the distance. For months, it had symbolized the HOA's power, the place they threatened, monitored, weaponized. But now, it was something else entirely. Now, it was mine.
I stopped at the shoreline and let the quiet settle around me. The water was calm, rippling softly beneath the breeze. I thought about the first time I'd come here, just a guy with a fishing rod, looking for a moment of peace. That moment had snowballed into chaos, conflict, humiliation, and, ultimately, an unexpected victory. A victory I didn't even know I was fighting for at the beginning. Behind me, footsteps approached hesitantly. I didn't turn until the voice spoke. "You really did it!" It was my neighbor, Thomas. The one who had tried to warn me early on. The one who knew the HOA president's reputation better than anyone else. I nodded. Yeah, guess I did. He laughed under his breath. You should have seen her face when she realized the lake wasn't HOA property. I thought she was going to faint. She almost did, I said, cracking a smile for the first time all day. He grew serious. People are talking. The board? They're falling apart. She's blaming them for not catching the mistake. They're blaming her for everything else. I think this might actually be the end of her. Good, I said quietly. He looked out at the water with me. So, now what? What are you going to do with it? I shrugged. Not sure yet. But I knew he wasn't asking about the lake. He was asking about the neighborhood, about life after the war. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew it was coming. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with chaos. The HOA president tried desperately to regain control. She sent out angry emails claiming the meeting was invalid. She insisted the deed must be fraudulent. She demanded the board take immediate corrective action. But she was shouting into a void. Because the truth was undeniable. I owned the lake. And the more she fought it, the worse she looked. By the end of the week, 3 board members had resigned. They couldn't take the heat. Couldn't take the angry neighbors. Couldn't stand being tied to her sinking ship. Then came the petitions. Not mine. Theirs. The residents, tired of her bullying, her arrogance, her obsession with control, started gathering signatures to remove her as HOA president. It spread faster than wildfire, door to door, mailbox to mailbox, night after night. Within 4 days, they had enough. She was officially removed. Just like that. The woman who once strutted through the neighborhood like a queen now had no crown, no throne, and no subjects left to boss around. The new board, freshly elected, terrified of repeating her mistakes, reached out to me immediately. They wanted to work together, repair community trust, move forward. I didn't trust them. Not yet. But I listened. And when they asked if I'd consider negotiating lake access for residents, I didn't say no. But I didn't say yes either. Not until I knew they understood something. Respect is earned, not demanded. Her fall from power wasn't quiet. At first, she tried to pretend she didn't care. She acted like stepping down was temporary, like she chose it, like she was doing the community a favor. But then the real consequences started rolling in. The new board began uncovering all sorts of things she'd covered up. Improper fines, unauthorized fees, unapproved rule changes, and most damning of all, secret meetings held without quorum, including the ones she called about me. When the state HOA oversight group got involved, everything unraveled fast. She was reprimanded, fined, and barred from serving on any HOA board in the state for 5 years. The power she clung to so fiercely? Gone. And she didn't fade away gracefully. She avoided neighbors, avoided the mailbox, avoided walking past the lake entirely. Some people said she was planning to move. Others said she couldn't afford to. Her house was underwater financially. Either way, she was no longer a threat. Not to me, not to the community, not to anyone. And that alone felt like justice. After things settled, I sat down and thought about what owning the lake really meant. I could have turned it into private land. I could have fenced it off completely. I could have charged the HOA a fortune to access it. But none of that felt right. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't about punishing the neighborhood for the actions of one person. It was about restoring balance. So I set simple rules. 1.
No HOA enforcement allowed. They could not regulate the lake. Ever. 2. Anyone could fish if they asked permission. Not a permit, not a fee, just basic courtesy. 3. No harassment, no drama, no power games. Break that rule, lose access. The new board agreed instantly. Residents supported it overwhelmingly. For the first time since the conflict began, the lake felt peaceful again. People came to fish quietly. Kids threw stones into the water. Old couples sat on benches and watched sunsets. And every time I saw that, it felt worth it.
Without the old president storming around, the community actually relaxed. It was subtle at first. Fewer emails, fewer notices, fewer threats. Then it became obvious. People worked on their lawns without fear of violations. Kids chalked drawings on sidewalks without getting yelled at. Neighbors greeted each other more. It wasn't perfect. No neighborhood ever is. But it felt normal again. People started stopping me on evening walks. Thank you. You saved this place. We're glad you stood up to her. It felt strange being seen as the guy who fixed the community. All I wanted was to be left alone. But maybe that's why everything changed. Maybe it takes someone who doesn't want control to break the grip of someone who'll do anything for it. 6 weeks after the confrontation, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no name inside. Just a short message. You may have won the lake, but you destroyed this community. No signature. But I didn't need one. I recognized the handwriting. I read it once, then again. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was sad. She still didn't understand. I didn't destroy the community. I saved it from her. That summer, something happened that truly marked the end of the war. A group of neighborhood kids asked if they could host a small fishing competition at the lake. Nothing big, just friendly, just fun. They promised to clean up after, follow rules, and make sure nobody caused trouble. The old HOA never would have allowed it, but I did. I stood on the shore the morning of the event, coffee in hand, watching parents set up chairs, kids racing around with cheap rods and tangled lines. Laughter filled the air, the kind that feels like it heals things. And as I stood there, one of the parents approached me. "You know," she said, "this is the first time this community has felt happy in years." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. But inside, I knew the truth. The lake wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a symbol of freedom, a reminder that even ordinary people can push back against unfair power.
Months later, on a warm autumn evening, I ran into the former HOA president for the first time since her removal. She was walking her dog, head down, shoulders tense, eyes avoiding everyone. When she saw me, she froze. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, but she didn't. She stood there, clutching the leash, breathing unsteadily. I said nothing. I didn't need to. She swallowed hard. "You embarrassed me." I didn't respond. She was only trying to maintain order, she insisted, her voice small but still stubborn. I finally spoke. "Order isn't the same thing as control." She looked away. "You didn't have to fight me," she said quietly. "You could have cooperated. You could have just listened." I shook my head. "No, you wanted obedience, not cooperation." Silence stretched between us. Her dog tugged at the leash. She didn't move. "You ruined everything for me," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You did that to yourself." She didn't have an answer. Finally, she walked past me without another word. And that was the last time I saw her. A year after I bought the lake, everything looked different. Not perfect, Not conflict-free, but better. A new HOA board, new rules, transparent ones, new attitudes, less hostility, more cooperation. People learned that blind authority could crumble. They learned that power wasn't absolute. And they learned that sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be intimidated to change everything. Neighbors told the story to new residents like a local legend, the guy who bought the lake so the HOA couldn't bully him anymore. Kids thought it was cool. Adults thought it was unbelievable. Visitors thought it was hilarious. Me? I thought it was necessary. After everything, the fines, the police, the harassment, the hearings, the purchase, the conflict, one truth stood out. You don't have to accept unfair rules just because someone claims they're in charge. When people misuse authority, when they weaponize rules, when they turn community into control, you don't win by arguing within their system. You win by stepping outside it, by thinking differently, by finding leverage, by doing the unexpected, and sometimes by buying the lake.